Hey there, my name's Mark Savell. I'm a realtor with Sage Real Estate and a blogger over at TorontoLivings.com. And if you haven't heard yet, the Ontario government is bringing big changes to the way we lease out properties in the province. And in this video, we're going to dive right into it. I'm going to tell you what these new changes mean and how they will affect EU. Alrighty, so I got in my hand here the newly released Residential Tenancy Agreement form. This is something you've probably never seen before, but should get used to very quickly because this will be the only form we'll be allowed to use to do residential leases in Ontario. After April 30th, 2018, all rentals will have to be done on these forms, and if you haven't yet seen it, I have a link in the description below where you can download one from the Ontario government's website. Let's get into this. So why do we have this new agreement in place? I mean, we've been doing rentals for years in the city and everything seems to be going fine, so why change it now? The reality is the system we were using is flawed. There is all different types of contracts out there, full of different conditions and clauses and terms, and it's a really convoluted system we have, and I think a lot of people were getting burned because there was no regulation. So the Ontario government, as part of the Ontario Fair Housing Plan, made it a point of releasing one standardized mandatory form written in plain, simple language. Now, I've read this about 10-15 times already, and I gotta say, in the beginning, I was a little hesitant. I mean, nobody likes hearing that the government is drafting up mandatory contracts that everyone's supposed to use. I mean, I've been a realtor for a decade. What does the government know that I don't know that they can do better than me, right? That's kind of the general consensus. But when you dive into the agreement, there actually is a lot of good in it. And I think in the long term, switching to one mandatory standardized lease is going to make things a lot easier for everyone. Now, if I had to sum up the lease in one word, it would be clarity. It is clear, it is easy to understand. There's no legalese, there's no lawyer wording and complex and convoluted clauses and stuff like that. It is really straightforward. One thing I noticed is the contract is noticeably longer than some of the standard leases I would write for a residential property, but that's because they really go into detail and make sure the terms are clearly stated and very easy to understand. Now, the beauty of the document is it outlines what you can and cannot ask for in a lease. And if you've written a lot of leases in your past, or if you're a landlord or property manager, when you first read it, you might kind of say to yourself, whoa, they're changing this, they're changing that. Well, I don't write it this way. The reality is, a lot of people write their contracts with clauses, terms, and conditions that shouldn't be in there in the first place. So this really isn't changing the rules, it's more clarifying what the rules always were and how we should be writing our lease contract. So let me give you an example, and this is something I'm guilty of in full transparency. I've done it with all my leases, not knowing that the rules stated otherwise, but when I put together a lease, I always ask the tenant to give me a first and last month's rent deposit. Pretty standard, nothing out of the ordinary. Well, it's actually not allowed. You're only allowed to ask for 1 month at the end of the lease. You can't ask for the first and last. And this is something that I would say 99.9% of realtors who lease out properties have in their standard procedure. So it's going to be interesting to see how everybody adapts to this and starts getting comfortable with the fact that you could only ask for last month's rent. Another thing that popped out that really caught my attention is damage deposits. You know, landlords are always asking, can I ask for $500 damage deposit? What if they punch a hole through my wall? And my answer is, unfortunately, you can't ask for one. But I know there's a lot of realtors or landlords or property managers out there that try and get away with that. Well, in the new mandatory lease, that is very clearly stated that you are not allowed to do that. And lastly, I tend to pick up post-dated checks, so every month I can just go to the bank. I don't have to go to the property to get the check. You can't do that either. You could suggest it and they're welcome to take that process if they so choose to, but you cannot demand a tenant pay you prepaid rent or predated checks or an automatic withdrawal. They do not have to agree to that. For convenience, obviously it just works better for everybody, but that was one thing that stood out to me that was business as usual, and now I might have to change and adjust based on what the rules actually do state. So like I said, you're gonna read this new document and you're gonna see some things that may look different from how you're doing business now. Just remember, the rules haven't changed, they're just now further clarified as to how we have to proceed. And at the end of the lease, they also have a 6-page appendix. And in the appendix, they go over each clause in greater detail. So some, for clarity purposes, they provide a few paragraphs where they explain the meaning behind the clauses or how these clauses are supposed to be drafted and written and filled out type of thing. So I find that to be a really good resource for people to very easily understand what they're getting themselves into. And I would say the strongest point of this new agreement is that the wording is extremely clear. It is very simple. It is so straightforward. And it is a welcome change to, I think, how some people draft up their clauses now, because these conditions, you know, you get really complex and maybe miss the point that you were trying to make in some of the wording. But with this new one, nice and easy. So a bit of criticism. There is a few things I would like to see added to the new contract. For example, there's no section that lists out which appliances are going to be included in the lease. So is there going to be a fridge, a stove, a dishwasher? I think they should just add one more section where we can very clearly list out what everything is, because it will make the process a lot easier going forward. Now, one thing that's really important to note, that yes, this is a mandatory form. And I think when I first heard the word mandatory and government written, I thought, well, what, I can't change this? I have to go by what the government's telling me to put in my lease? Not true. There is a section where you can add your own clauses, but they make it very clear that if you are going to add your own clauses, make sure they are in line with the Landlord-Tenant Act. So if you're trying to throw in things like no pets allowed, or you know, for a non-sufficient fund check, you have to give me $200. It has to follow the rules of the Landlord-Tenant Act. So you can make additions to the contract, you just have to make sure they're in line with what their current rules are. And a big question I've been hearing out there is, well, will this impact the market? Is this gonna make rents go up? Is this gonna make rents go down? I think it's a moot point either way. This isn't really something that's going to change the values of rental properties. It's just going to make the process a little bit more easier to understand and a little bit more streamlined across the board. So those are my thoughts on the new mandatory changes to the lease agreement here in Ontario. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you haven't yet, please hit subscribe. Thank you for watching.